my there's a lot of stories. In fact, I'm writing a book, and then the book is entitled "Don't Tell Your Mother," and it insinuates exactly what it means. Things that Dad and I did that don't tell your mother. And in 1970s, Dad had a Jeep Wagoneer. Back then, it was in the glove box. It had a little switch. You'd switch it to emergency, and all four of the tires would pull at one time. It was like a tank. Flair loved it, so Flair bought it for my dad. My dad bought a new one. Well, we were in Carolina somewhere, and after the matches, and Flair pulled up to the stoplight, and Dad pulled up behind him. And I wonder how powerful this thing is. So he went up and touched bumpers and pushed Flair right through the stop sign, right through the stoplight. The smoke and tires squealing everywhere. And sure enough, an officer saw it, and the officer came up and stopped him. And he jumped out with his gun out, thought he was going to be arresting people. And he saw Flair, then he saw my dad, and it turned into all law enforcement was forgotten about. The guy's radioing his buddies, other officers, to come over and get autographs and this and that. And I mean, for something that was, you don't do that type of stuff. And as we've gotten back in the car and we were leaving, he looked at me and said, "Don't tell your mother."
I've heard a lot of stories about your dad driving. What kind of driver was he?
Fast at all times.
Yeah.
Whereas in 1977, he bought my mom a 911 Porsche. So we get this car and had it for a couple days. And there's this road in South Kansas City. It used to be dirt roads and just this highway running through it. Now it's all, of course, built up. But he called it the Autobahn because there really weren't enough police to patrol out that far, except for the highway patrol. And this wasn't really a major highway. So we jumped on that thing in this car and off we went. And at that speed, when you see an officer, what are you going to do? So he went blowing past the officer. And I don't know if you remember the movie Smokey and the Bandit. Yep. But when they pull the nose to nose, the cop cars nose to nose, and the guys with their guns, over the hood and over the trunk of the car and whatnot. So they set up this roadblock, and of course we had to stop at that. And the officers came up kind of in a semicircle. All of them had their hands right on their hips, ready to pull the guns. And one kind of came out forward or broke out from him. He walked up, he looked down on the driver's side window, and he just shook his head. He said, "Harley," or actually he called him Mr. Race. He said, "Mr. Race, do you have any idea how fast you were going?" And my dad said, "Well, the speedometer was pegged at 150. And the police officer said, "Sir, you were doing 163 miles an hour. You were tripling the speed limit." And at that time, all speed limits were 55. There wasn't, during the oil embargo, whatever, there wasn't 65, 75 speed limit. It was all 55. You were tripling the speed limit, sir. And Dad said, "Yeah, well, I saw you. I was letting off." It's like, being honest. And the officer said, then Dad said, "It's a new car. I'm breaking it in." The officer said, "Sir, now that it's broken, the speed limit is 55 or around there." And he said, "Okay, all right, sir. And would you mind signing some autographs for some of the other officers?" He said no. So we went up and signed some autographs and got back in the car, and we took off going back the other direction at around 55. And he looked at me and said, "Don't tell your mother."